Just recently learned about a couple of brothers, Brad and Dallas Woodhouse, who are brothers who sit on opposite sides of the political aisle in the U.S. So Brad is an American Democratic Party activist, and Dallas is the executive director of the North Carolina Republican Party. And they argue bitterly and regularly on television, and apparently off-screen as well. We learned this earlier this week when their mother decided to call in to C-SPAN, a show upon which they were arguing back and forth, and scold them in front of national television. She told them that she was glad that both of them went to their in-laws for Thanksgiving this year instead of coming home. And she wanted them to get this nonsense out of their system before coming home this weekend. She loves them both, she said, but she just had to call and tell them and the 3 million viewers that she was sick and tired of their squabbling and wants a peaceful Christmas. If you want to hear a Southern mother asking for what she needs this Christmas, just type in, "Oh God, it's Mom," on YouTube. And humorous though this may be, I also think it's pretty courageous. After busting a gut laughing, I tried to empathize with what led this mother to make such an extraordinarily public plea. How often has she tried to get them to be civil over turkey? How many times has she begged them individually and in each other's company to tone down the bitterness? And I can only imagine she was one desperate mother willing to risk national humiliation to touch her sons' hearts and ask them to see each other as brothers once more. Theirs is the dog-eat-dog worldliness. There is this dog-eat-dog worldliness about the Woodhouses brothers' way of being. For in their way of being, only one of them can be right. And it isn't too far off from the world that Joseph inhabits. Living as Joseph does under Deuteronomic law, he finds himself and everyone around him seesawing between states of vindication and shame, with some heavy weights tipping the scale in unjust ways at the cost of marginalized lives. The law in Deuteronomy 22, for instance, says that if a woman is accused of having sex before marriage, her parents must produce the bloody cloth her marriage was consummated on. And if no proof of the young woman's virginity can be found, then the sinful woman shall be brought to the door of her father's house, and there the men of her town who grew up with her shall stone her to death. Now Joseph gets queasy and draws the line at the stoning of Mary, but he isn't willing to believe her story about the pregnancy or to marry her until he has a dream where God's angel tells him to let go of fear, embrace the wife and child. The better angels over his human nature have won, and he calls the child Jesus. And it takes such willingness to risk vulnerability and public humiliation to do what Joseph does. It takes courage. And Brené Brown points out that that root word of courage is cor in Latin, the word for heart. And in one of its earliest forms, the word courage had a very different definition than it does for us today. Courage originally meant to speak one's mind by the telling of one's heart. To speak one's mind by the telling of one's heart. And over time, that definition of courage has changed. Today, it is more synonymous with heroic. And Brené Brown goes on to say that heroics is important, and certainly we need heroes, but I think we've lost touch with the idea that speaking honestly and openly about who we are, what we're feeling, our experiences, the good and the bad, is the definition of courage. Heroics is often about putting one's life on the line. Ordinary courage is about putting our vulnerability on the line. And in today's world, that's pretty extraordinary, because it can be isolating and frightening to show your heart to another. I think of the woman who is an estranged sister sending out a Christmas card this year with hopes of a reply. The awkward uncle-in-law who everyone knows doesn't fit, coming to Christmas dinner everywhere anyway, and overhearing as he gets his coat, "I'll never understand why she married him." Those who cannot find compassion for one another suppress the dreams of our better angels and allow fear of the outsider to draw from us bitter breath for poisoned speech. So I've been thinking a lot this week and looking for acts of ordinary courage and finding them everywhere. The mother who admonishes her boys to play nice. The 84-year-old bishop from Norway who pled guilty to giving job and an income to an undocumented woman because he would rather go to jail than obey a dehumanizing law. My son, Jacob, who dove under the kitchen table and played just out of my reach because I was mad that he wouldn't clean up the mess he had made. Later I said, "Buddy, I noticed you got pretty upset. Can you tell me about that?" "I thought you were going to punish me," he said, "and send me to live somewhere else." For a boy who's already had 5 sets of parents and households, well, that fear is not fantasy, but reality-based. And it took tremendous courage for him to come out from that table where he could speak of his fears and be within arm's reach of a hug. Ordinary courage. And while that kitchen table scenario was real, I wonder how many of us hide under the metaphorical tables, especially at Christmas, just out of reach of the people we love. For fear of being cast out, we stay silent about the problems we're having at work. We hide the facts that we are grieving a loss, and we never talk about the ways some of the holiday traditions have stopped being life-giving and might need to be changed. And yet, God's angels return. God's angels return Christmas after Christmas, visiting homes, stables, wildernesses with their shouts of joy and good news. Don't be afraid, they say. We're not asking for heroics, just ordinary courage. We're bestowing God's gift of vulnerability and compassion upon you and your loved ones this year. Vulnerability and compassion, we reply. You first. And no sooner have those defensive words left our mouths than we are confronted by the babe in the manger, the ultimate expression of vulnerability. God's vulnerability, God's compassion for us. The central story of our faith is one of courage, the incarnation of God's heart on display for all of us to see. And gathered around the Christ is a couple saying yes to parenthood, an innkeeper who thought they were at capacity but found a way to make room, shepherds escaping their daily routine in a hope to find God's miracle, wise astrologers defying a murderous tyrant. Ordinary courage, lighting the way forward for us to follow. Merry Christmas, people of courage. Amen.